Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. Oakland, California, Tuesday, May 16th, 2023, 4 o'clock p.m. On Interstate 880 in Oakland, a black motorist was driving southbound when some racist having a bout of road rage began to menace her on the highway at high speed. A driver in a white Jeep repeatedly called the black occupant of the other vehicle the N-word, all this while the person in the other car was videoing him. At one point, this racist road rager attempted to intentionally ram the victim's vehicle before he lost control and crashed into a wall on the right shoulder of the freeway. The video of this racial attack was posted online, and not surprisingly, it went viral. A nice case of instant karma, but this crime report is only just beginning. People rightly wanted to see this criminal arrested because he committed a hate crime. The police, however, weren't going to do anything because he committed a hate crime. So the internet users tracked this criminal down by researching his license plate, which was visible in the video. Due to public pressure, a few days after the race attack on May 19th, this assailant was finally arrested, but mostly that was due to the huge attention that the video got. California's Highway Patrol identified the criminal as 61-year-old Tracy Blackwell. He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and given hate crime enhancements. But because he's a white supremacist and the person he was attacking was black, we can count the days until he's given a sweetheart plea deal. The hate crime will be pleaded down to basically nothing. There'll be no jail time either because that's the prosecutor's standard operating procedure for anti-black hate crimes. And of course you won't be surprised to learn this creep has a criminal record because these white supremacists always do. In December of 2000, he had come under investigation for allegedly stalking a 19-year-old woman and making obscene phone calls to her house. While he was being investigated for those accusations, police discovered videotapes of him sexually abusing a child. In 2001, he was convicted of lewd and lascivious acts with a child under the age of 14. He was released after only 8 years. So on top of everything else, this racist is also a pedophile. This is a convicted child rapist, and the police weren't really keen on going after him until the public made them do it. He's also been charged in the past with burglary and drug use charges too, so he's your basic meth-smoking, thieving, rape-happy white supremacist. In other words, a typical white supremacist. But there's another aspect of this case that needs to be discussed. In fact, it's the reason for today's crime report. This Blackwell creep is just part of a nationwide trend of anti-black hate crimes on the rise across the country and particularly in California, though you wouldn't know it by how the white media's deliberately ignored this. Since this happened in California, we're going to focus on that state. In California, black people are 5% of the population. Black people are the lowest percentage of any racial group in the state, and yet in 2021, black Californians were nearly half of the victims of hate crimes in that state. So with Gavin Newsom as governor and Kamala Harris as vice president, they worked together to crack down on that, right? Of course not. In fact, the hate crimes data for 2022 was even worse, with data showing crimes targeting black people in California remaining the most widespread and having risen 27%. So even though black people are only a handful of California's residents, we are the primary targets of hate crimes in that state. And they admit that this went up after the murder of George Floyd. That's important because that crime happened in 2020, the same year the authorities began to fixate on anti-Asian hate crimes, most of which allegedly happening in California. Well, the data on that is in. We can see what was going on with anti-Asian hate crimes the last couple of years, and we see that those have dropped by nearly 45%. That's damn near cutting those numbers in half. So while hate crimes against black Californians have been skyrocketing in the last 2 years, hate crimes against Asians have been plummeting during that exact same period, in the exact same last 2 years. Now, the white media and the government were saying the opposite, though. They've been reporting that hate crimes against Asians have been skyrocketing, and they've been saying it's black people who's responsible for it. Liars like Juju Chang have been saying that Asians are the biggest targets of hate crimes in America, and it's black people doing all of it. However, we've seen in the last year alone at least 2 mass shootings of Asian Americans that were committed by Asian suspects. You had that case just last year of an Asian man of Chinese descent who went into a Taiwanese church and killed 1 parishioner and wounded several others. He did it because he was angry about Chinese-Taiwanese relations. This was not an ethnic crime because Chinese and Taiwanese are the exact same ethnic group. They only split in the late 1940s because of the political schism between China's former leader Chiang Kai-shek and the ascendant new ruler of China, Chairman Mao. Now, if these guys are the exact same race and ethnic group, why is the white media insisting on calling this a hate crime? Because prosecutors say this happened in a Presbyterian church. So they're claiming that's the element that makes it a hate crime. Now, this incident is part of what California authorities count as an anti-Asian hate crime. In reality, though, it was political violence, no different than the violence between the British and Northern Ireland, no different than the violence that Timothy McVeigh carried out. So while you've had black attorney generals of New York and others demand hate crimes legislation specifically to address anti-Asian violence, what's been going on, though, is that the anti-Asian violence has been plummeting. Perhaps it's because there's been so much attention on it by the authorities. I think that has more than a little to do with it. But the real question is, why are the greatest number of hate crimes victims in America being completely ignored? We already know the reason why. Now, if Asian Americans were being assaulted and attacked at lower rates than black Americans, and yet those attacks justified an Asian hate crime law and justified task forces and focusing on punishing the perpetrators, this while the number of anti-Asian hate crimes were actually going down, then how much more of a priority should black Americans be, considering that we are the ones who are the majority of hate crimes victims?
We'll continue with the moment of truth in just a moment, but first, a word from the official sponsor of Black Empowerment, Power Tools. There's no telling when something's going to come up, so make sure you carry your power tools at all times. You never know when you're going to need to bring the hammer down, or when you'll have some trash that needs to be blown away, or some obstacle that requires cutting down. Don't get caught empty-handed. Keep your hammer close by. Keep that leaf blower at the ready, and always carry your steel. Power tools, because no matter what your day job or side hustle may be, there's no excuse for not being ready to put in some work.
Biden and the Democrats are in control of the Department of Justice. They held control of the House of Representatives for the first 2 years of Biden's term, which sets the federal budget, and yet they didn't have Merrick Garland initiate a task force specifically to go after anti-black hate crimes. In fact, Merrick Garland's DOJ did the opposite. Like in the case of Ahmaud Arbery, they were offering sweetheart plea deals to Arbery's murderers, trying to get them put up in some cushy federal country club so that they could escape the hard conditions of the hellhole in Georgia that they deserve. Democrats have not failed to put measures in place to protect black people. They have refused to do so. You have never seen any Democrat politician campaigning on a platform of getting hate crimes legislation specifically for black people, or talking about how they're going to be punishing anyone who harms black people. And they're not going to, because their job is to get us to sit on our hands and not fight back, while they sit in a corner and pretend as if they don't approve of us being attacked, when in reality, they're silently cheering it on. Some of them not so silently. With black people being the overwhelming majority of hate crimes victims in America, any laws regarding hate crimes against us naturally should be the harshest in the nation. That's a no-brainer. But it's also been a non-starter, too. In so-called liberal California, we see that there's no white Democrats or white Republicans. When it comes to black people, they both work together against us. Anti-black racism is a bipartisan issue. Both major parties are thoroughly dedicated to the repression and ultimately eradication of black Americans. When you have 5% of the population being made targets 50% of the time, that's how you know the state is behind it. These crimes are not merely happening, they are being allowed to happen, with the encouragement of the state, and the criminals know it. These hate criminals know full well that attacking black people won't be punished, and that this is the government giving them full permission to make targets out of us, because it certainly couldn't happen if the government didn't want it to. We've seen successive white governments enact legislation for groups whose numbers are far smaller than black Californians and enact legislation for them on issues that have nothing to do with violence whatsoever. If they have a concern, then they get some legislation. And these white politicians claim, well, it's because their numbers are so small that there is very little opposition, what have you. So when black people who are 5% of California's population are being attacked, why is nothing being done? Why is no one even talking about it? These are Democrats, mind you. California is a Democratic state. They can't claim that Republicans are stonewalling them or blocking them from passing any legislation or from putting together any task forces. This is California showing you that anti-black hate crimes are official state policy by the Democratic Party as well as the Republicans. We are up against an organized offense. You have these racist judges and racist prosecutors who are essentially acting as support staff for the irregular forces of white supremacy, giving them moral as well as judicial and legal support whenever they carry out their anti-black crimes. And it's way past time those bastards were held accountable for that. I've been saying for years that it's not enough to put the arm on the crooked cops or these prejudiced prosecutors. We absolutely must put these judges on notice that we see their criminality and they won't be allowed to just get away with it. We have so many Biden bots who are finally sticking their heads up here after the last few years, and they're telling us that all these alleged things Biden's done for black people are why we should vote for him in 2024. And that's why the black media is here to point out how this is all a pack of lies. At best, and I put the word best in quotes, we've only had a couple of insincere gestures from that wrinkled-up racist. But even if his gestures had been sincere, we're not going for gestures. They didn't give Asians gestures. They did something substantive. They put laws on the books, and then they enforced them. That's why the number of hate crimes against Asians has plummeted. And they were going to the mat for a constituency that doesn't even really vote for the Democrats. Black people are the base of the Democratic Party, and they make it a policy to ignore us. Make no mistake, this is not the result of us not voting for them. It's not a question of us not having enough political power either. The problem is you have a dedicated gang of anti-black racists who are deliberately using their positions of political authority in order to give cover to race attacks against black people. This is a race war being waged against us, and these so-called policymakers are in on it. It is the complete and thorough continuity of policy across both political parties that shows you this is intentional, and both parties put their heads together to ensure that it stays this way. The government's hatred of black people that enables and emboldens all these violent miscreants to attack us. That's the real hate crime. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Mark Stroud, Andrew Lewis, George Bruce, Norma Anthony, and Alan Reese. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.